Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you're watching on. They'll appear here in my chat room, and we can talk directly. And as I have no guest today, the chat room is on the screen so we can all share. And we are starting a new calendrical year. Today is the second day of that year. And my stated subject for today is moving on with the year. And I thought I would probably continue some of what I was saying yesterday. I'm going to take just a moment to make sure we're going out properly, which, yes, we do appear to be. And I hope everyone is having a good start to their year. I had a good start to my year yesterday. Among other things, I went to Greenwood Cemetery here in the Danville area to visit the graves of my ancestors, um, and had some time talking with them, did a few oracles from them, um, did an oracle about the coming year. Hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you. And that was quite pleasant. I had a good afternoon with my home helper. Hello, Swack fan. If I'm sure I've mentioned it previously, but I have a home, I guess we'd say a home health care worker who comes periodically through the week. And my new home helper is pagan. So we had a lovely time talking about pagan things as I went to the cemetery to visit my ancestors. And she completely understood what I was doing, which is a very nice thing to have happen. Of course, as you can imagine, home helpers come from all different backgrounds. Some of them would have been a bit mystified. But it's very nice to have someone with a like mind. Not the first one that I've had who was pagan, but and in fact, that has kind of caught my attention. I have had 4 home health aides in not quite 2 years, and 2 of the 4 were pagan, which is interesting. And hello to Antonio in the chat room. It's good to see you. And in its own way, that's a little bit of an omen for the future. It speaks to where we are in society. And I want to thank Antonio for making the New Year's greeting of myself, which has been going around, which is quite amusing. And it replicates a famous line I once said that I won't repeat on the air, but a bit out of character for me, but it is relatively appropriate advice for every occasion. We'll paraphrase it, don't mess it up. And, this is, I think, an important year for everyone. And hello to to Unique One in the chat room. And Reverend Antonio says I couldn't help myself. I appreciate that. And I thought it was great fun. But I think this is an important year with a lot of important things to do, and not messing it up is kind of important. I think it's very important for us not to distract ourselves with needless fights and needless controversies, but to focus on what's important in the world, what's important for our community, what's important for us. And, if people try to lead us into their personal rivalries or their personal vendettas, we need to not let ourselves be led there. And, I've talked frequently about the damage done by witch wars on this program over the years, because I've watched a lot of damage be done by witch wars. And more often than not, witch wars come down to personal vendettas, usually described as important community issues, but rarely actually that. And I hope that I have lived my life in such a way that you will take my word for it, that being distracted into other people's personal vendettas is never good. and which wars are never profitable for anyone, usually not even the people trying to prosecute. What we need to do is to focus on the positive things we can do moving into the future to deal with the challenges we face. It's very easy, and as we look around contemporary society, we see it everywhere. Very easily are people being led to focus on their prejudices, their personal hatreds, their personal vendettas, and ignoring everything important that's happening around them. People's emotions are being widely used to manipulate and misdirect their energy. We, who call ourselves the craft of the wise, really should be wise enough not to be manipulated this way, and not to allow, not to allow our energies to be drawn into unimportant situations. We have many important situations before us, both as pagans and just as people. Our world is in a time of great turmoil. Of course, it's always a time of great turmoil, but it seems like it's particularly so at present. There are many parts of the world that are in a state of terrible warfare, and these are things we might reasonably be focused on. Hello to Steve Taylor in the chat room. Our economy has been something less than great for a while now. This is something we might be well advised to be focused on. Our ability as individuals to provide for ourselves the things we need. That's something that's worthy of our energy and our time, whether it's planting a garden to grow your own vegetables, or finding local farmers markets and other places where you can locally source your food, often for considerably less price. These are things that are well worth your time. Um, Getting caught up in pagan A hates pagan B, it's nonsense and should be avoided. And of course, we also have the political world, where the rise of Christian nationalism may present some real challenges to our community. And this is something we should save our energy to deal with. We might well see legal challenges to our status um, in these next few years, because the people who have risen to power have made kind of clear that that is one of their goals. Will they be successful? Well, that's not guaranteed. Is someone going to try it? I think that's a reasonable guarantee. I remember the Helms Amendment. Some of you may also remember it, or you may have heard me talk about it. I had the great honor to actually be in Washington, D.C. when the Helms Amendment was defeated. And almost at the moment that it was defeated, it began to rain, which we interpreted as a blessing. The Helms Amendment, if you're not familiar with it, was an amendment by Senator Jesse Helms, who I think was one of the most negative people who has been in U.S. politics in the last couple of hundred years. But he introduced an amendment that would have denied religious recognition to any church that had any involvement with any death. This had the real possibility of passing. In that era, the 1980s, it might not have stood up to a court challenge. But as it happens, Congress defeated it. But it was a real concern, and this, of course, was around the same time as the Satanic Panic, which we see gathering steam again in the shadows. The idea that something like that could be mounted again is a very real idea, but would it stand up to a court challenge now with the current Supreme Court? Would the new Congress actually pass it? These are things we should be asking ourselves, and if such a thing is introduced, what are we going to do? There's only one thing we can reasonably do, and that is organize to let our legislators know how strongly we oppose it, and make a loud enough noise for them to listen regardless of what they may privately feel. Are we going to be able to do that? Well, not if pagan A hates pagan B and we're all fighting over that. We need to avoid this nonsense. And I will grant you that to some extent, this inclination to start these personal witch wars may be a fear response when times seem overwhelming. It may seem like something that the individual can control. But the truth is, it's simply a waste of our energy, and we need to focus on what's important. Now, you may say, oh, that would never happen here. But if you've been paying attention, that will never happen here is not a particularly sensible comment in the present era. Lots of things have been happening in the last 20 years that we never thought were going to happen here. The idea of conservative Christian forces, Christian nationalist forces, trying to reintroduce a tiered system of religious recognition is not at all far-fetched. They were promoting this just a few years ago. If you remember Patrick McCollum's fight against the prison system, it was because they had instituted a tiered system of religious recognition that acknowledged certain religions as being acceptable and certain others as being not acceptable, despite the fact that all were legal. He was able to eventually get past that by fighting it for years and years. If you remember the Pentacle Quest, the Veterans Administration refused to allow pagan service people who were being buried in the national cemeteries to have the symbol, particularly of the Wiccan religion, the pentagram, on their tombstone. Even though all sorts of other organizations, many of them much smaller than the Wiccan and pagan movements, were recognized. And after 10 years of fighting, this was finally won. And today, pagan service people can have not only the pentagram, but other pagan symbols on their tombstones. But it was openly admitted when they finally won that it had purely been about religious prejudice. Do not think that this cannot become an official thing. And as we look at this coming year, I strongly believe there are going to be times when we are going to have letter writing campaigns or emailing campaigns toward our elected representatives. And of course, I'm speaking primarily to a United States audience, but it's true, I think, in many parts of the world beyond just the United States, against this kind of thing, to make our voice heard. And hello to Fox Fur Witch. It's good to see you, Fox Fur Witch. And I don't see this as a bad thing. I see this as a challenge to us to stand up for what we claim we believe in. And, if we can't write a damn letter, what are we talking about? If it doesn't mean that much to us, then it doesn't mean anything to us. We should be able to do that. Now, what I don't particularly want to see are a lot of online petitions being sent around, because I think those are mostly useless. I see them constantly. They're usually being run by for-profit companies who really want you to sign their petition, and they're making advertising money from it, but it's not having its effect. Online petitions are basically useless, with a few exceptions. Those exceptions are these. If the petition is being run by the organization that is being affected by it, and I've seen that happen a few times, where they will have a poll or petition or otherwise a place for people to indicate how they feel about something that the organization is considering. When they're asking themselves, well, then yes, that's worth doing. When it's part of an organized campaign, and there's actually someone who is going to take that petition and say, look, members of the legislature, or look, whatever organization we're talking about, at all these people who signed this petition. In cases like that, an internet petition has some value, but for the most part it doesn't. And one of the reasons it doesn't is anyone receiving such a petition knows how very easy it was to just click a button and, quote, sign it. A letter or a phone call, on the other hand, requires an actual input. And someone who's willing to do that is also someone who is going to be voting, someone who is going to be taking actual actions in life. So if, as we go forward, we have to have this kind of organization, we have to remember this kind of consideration, that we have to take actions that have meaning. We're wasting our time if we take symbolic actions that nobody notices. We're wasting our time if we devote our energies to side battles that have no meaning. And I really don't think this is a time that we should be wasting our energy. Now, Swackfan says, there used to be pentacles in older churches, if I recall. Well, yes, the pentagram was a Christian symbol also. It's been a pretty universal symbol. The pentagram goes back to the very earliest parts of recorded history. You find it in ancient Mesopotamia, and you find it in ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, it was the sign Tuah, and when put in a circle, Tuat. Tuah meant magic or holiness. Tuat meant the land of the dead. And in Mesopotamia, it was associated with the planet Venus and the goddess Ishtar. It was very popular in Greek times. It was particularly connected to the Pythagoreans, but not exclusively them. And in medieval Europe, it was often used in Christian symbology, where it was tied to the 5 wounds of Jesus and other ideas. So yes, you do find pentagrams in old churches, sometimes even in newer ones, because it's not a completely dead article. But the pentagram has been used all over the place, and it has many different meanings depending on who's using it. And that, that could be a book in itself, talking about the history of that symbol and the many different ways it's been used. I am going to take a moment of pedantry, to address the use of the term pentacle versus pentagram. And these two words are totally unrelated. Pentacle comes basically out of the Latin language through French and or Italian, and pentagram comes from the Greek language. A pentagram is a 5-pointed star, particularly the unicursal 5-pointed star, but not exclusively. Any 5-pointed star can be considered a pentagram. Doesn't matter if it has a circle or doesn't have a circle, they're all pentagrams. That is the meaning of the word. A pentacle is basically originally a medallion. It comes from the Italian pentacolo, or the French pentacolo, which means hanging from a collar. Collar in this case being a collar of chain that was popular in the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance. And it refers to a physical depiction of something. In metaphysics, it became popular through the grimoires, and originally was the medallion that you used and that you wore in certain workings to invoke certain powers. And they all had particular symbols for the particular powers. And hello to Rev Melanie in the chat room. It's good to see you, Rev Melanie. And those symbols were not, as a general rule, pentagrams, although a few were. And there were hundreds of them. Later, the term pentacle also came to refer to an altarpiece of these same symbols that represented the different powers that a ceremonial magician might be working with. And from there has come to mean any physical representation of a metaphysical design. So if you have a ring or a medallion of a pentagram, well, that can be considered a pentacle. If you have it carved into a tombstone, that can be considered a pentacle. The design is still a pentagram, and the two words are not related. Just a little aside. but good to be mindful of, or reading particularly older works, you may find yourself confused at what's being referred to. Um, so again, the symbol of the pentagram has been pretty universal, and even today, I know lots of pagan people who love to get the big stars that are sold sometimes for household decoration to use as pentagrams in their own decoration. But I think very often those were actually designed to be the Star of Texas or the Star of something else. But the symbol is so universal that it can be used in many different ways. When I was a young man, I had a medallion that I might still own that had a black pentagram inside a red circle. And I understood this in purely Wiccan terms. But I knew, and it was pointed out to me, that it certainly wasn't produced for that purpose. It was a regular piece of jewelry that you might have bought, and um, it probably had its own different meaning. But for me, it was perfect for that meaning. And this is one of the things about life, together with the constant importance of coffee. One of the things about life is that things don't mean the same thing to everyone. And what one person may see as the Star of Texas, another person sees as a pentagram. Um, this is true for many symbols, and I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a way of finding commonality with others, a way of saying, "Oh, I see you use that symbol. My people use it too. For us, it means something different." Blah blah. Um, It's like people often like to talk about the overlap of pagan and Christian customs around many holidays. I don't see that there being anything bad in that at all. I see that as being a way of saying, look how much alike we are. We're all drawing on these various similar traditions. I think we're much better off to regard them as shared traditions than running around saying, look at all the stuff Christians stole from pagans. Um, I don't think that. I think it's much better to use it as a positive way of building bridges, and the more that we can do that, I think the better off we're going to be. Now, not all of those people are willing to have bridges built. Obviously, we know that. Just a few moments ago, I was talking about the ones least willing to have bridges built, but others are. I've met lots of people from a Christian or Judeo-Christian background who were fascinated to learn about pagan symbolism and pagan ideas without changing their own. But they were very interested and willing to learn, and found it fascinating that we had these things in common. Um, I think it's very important that we not automatically make negative assumptions about how people are going to react. Now, having said that, going back to the rise of Christian nationalism, when they've already told us how they're going to react, we're very foolish to not listen to that also. And just because they've worked for 40 odd years to get to where they are and made very clear what they plan to do, doesn't necessarily mean they'll be successful with it. But it certainly should lead us to believe we have some challenges coming. And as we go forward in this year, we need to remain mindful of that. We should not allow ourselves to be frightened or overwhelmed by it, but rather we should try to be ready. We should have a clue of what we can do. And I've spoken a little bit already in this program about what we can do. The simplest things we can do are be prepared to write letters, make phone calls, send emails when these situations come up in as great of numbers as possible. And while that will not change certain people's minds, it may slow them down, and it will change other people's minds. That is a real practical thing that can be done. Occasionally, protest may be practical. Writing in public places about who we are and what we stand for is a practical thing to do. And why those who might seek to curtail our legal status and legal rights would be wrong to do so. That's a practical thing to do. And in everything we do, keeping our eye on practicality is very important. Of course, magic is also a practical thing to do when you're magical people. So continuing to work for the future we want to see, the positive world we want to build, this is something that we also must continue to do. And all of these things, as we move forward with this year, these are the places we should put our energy. We want to focus on what will be the most effective response to challenges and obstacles we may find ourselves facing. No matter what happens, there are always challenges and obstacles that we face in life. So being prepared for practical responses is never a waste of time. We have every reason to think we will see certain particular political challenges and obstacles during the coming couple of years. And preparing for that is certainly not a waste of time. One of the great benefits we have in the political system we live in is that any actual attempt to limit our legal status and rights would likely be challenged in the courts, which, at least at present, would take years to work through, and might very well come to fruition in a more favorable political moment. So these are some of the things that we must be thinking of. And, I hate to keep coming back to this particular subject, but it is the subject of this time. It is the subject of this moment. And I think we're very foolish not to look at it. One of the things I've been doing, I've been involved in either printed or video media my entire adult life, really. Back in the 1980s, I was involved in writing or illustrating for over 90 pagan magazines. I did my own magazine, The Wheel of Hecate. In the 90s, I was involved with Psychic Chicago magazine, Telepathic Chicago magazine, and the Roundtable magazine, all of which were local to Chicago. Online, I've been involved in the Daily Spell and other things, and of course, all these years of Corellian TV, formerly Magic TV. And all through that time, I've tried to talk about news, about what's happening in the world. And hello to Judy in the chat room. It's good to see you, Judy. Very often, the reaction I've gotten is, all we want to hear are incense recipes and spells. We don't want to hear about news. And Judy says, your hair is so beautiful. Thank you, Judy. I appreciate that. But we have to be looking at the news, and more now than probably any other time in my life. So I will keep coming back to this, though I'll talk about other things too. But what we need not to do is to be overwhelmed by the news. We need to use the news to empower ourselves to respond to those challenges we may face. We need to use it in a positive way to take positive actions. So that's my message to you today, and I hope that you find it helpful. I'll be back again tomorrow, and now let us take a moment for a word from our sponsors. Why? Because we love our sponsors.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. We will probably have our next auction next week. And thank you all for joining me, and let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do in our lives, and we ask you to help us as we go forward into this new year, to go forward in strength, in courage, and with resolution to stand up for what we believe in, and to take practical actions to promote the future we wish to see. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love, and knowing you are always with us. From respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and I'll see you tomorrow.